Okay, welcome everyone to the 2023 Pet Food Alliance webinar series. We're thankful that you're joining us today for another enlightening webinar related to some of the research priorities identified through the Pet Food Alliance. For those of you who are joining us live or watching virtually in a recording, a few notes about the Pet Food Alliance. And first and foremost, that it was founded on and remains committed to the collaborative development of solutions to industry-wide challenges, and really leans into the exploration of mutually beneficial opportunities for all of our industry partners, with the philosophy that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that the successes of each individual entity or company enhances the successes of all. As part of our educational mission, the Pet Food Alliance is hosting a series of webinars over the course of fall 2023, and we have one webinar left yet this calendar year focused on innovation and rendering in pet food. So look for more information later this week and early next week about that webinar coming out in December. But we're incredibly thankful for our webinar partners today from Kemin, and we'll start their webinar just momentarily. Before we do, though, just a reminder for those of you who are members of our working groups or who would like to join our working groups, that the fall 2023 working group meetings will be held next week in Auburn, Alabama, in conjunction with the Balchem Imaginarium. So we'll have a social gathering on Wednesday, November 15th, followed by our formal working group meetings on November 16th. And one of the purposes of co-hosting these working group meetings at academic campuses is exposure of our industry partners, not only to students and potential employees, but also the research resources that exist through our academic partnerships. So we hope that you're able to join us, and more information about this opportunity is available on our website, or feel free to reach out to me directly. But again, we're incredibly thankful and delighted to have with us today members from Kemin, who have been part of the Pet Food Alliance since its inception and have really pioneered some of the innovative and collaborative conversations in the product quality working group related to oxidation and product quality of products that are used in pet food manufacturing, specifically those that come from the rendering stream. So we're thankful for their engagement and involvement in the Pet Food Alliance and look forward to their webinar. Before I turn the microphone over to them, if you will, a few housekeeping notes. Please do keep your microphones muted and your cameras off during the webinar, and use the chat feature to address any questions or to offer any questions for our webinar providers. At the end of their presentation, we'll have the opportunity for an interactive Q&A. But without further ado, thank you, Ben, Catherine, and Lindsay for joining us today, and we look forward to an enlightening webinar focused on oxidation and product quality. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'll turn it over to you, Ben.
All right. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for the introduction, and thanks everyone here for this opportunity to present some of the work we've been doing. So let's see, hopefully everyone can see the presentation now.
Yep.
All right, perfect. So purpose of this talk is we're going to talk about some of the variables that can impact peroxide value measurement. Peroxide values in general are probably the most important lipid oxidation measurement used in the industry. And there are a lot of challenges as we work towards trying to develop a harmonized method using harmonized solvents, chemicals as such. So this is just going to cover some of that and what we've been doing over the last 6 months on working on the methodology and looking for opportunities to improve it. So we're going to have, there we go. Okay, we're going to have two speakers today. So I'm going to do the first half, and then I'm going to turn it over to Katie for the second half of the presentation. So if anybody has any questions or anything you would like to know more of, here's some information on how to reach us and contact us to get further information on this presentation. Just a couple slides on Kemin. So, you know, who is Kemin and what are we about? We're a private owned company. We were founded in.
I'm a fitness attendant.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Somebody had their speaker on. So we were founded in 1961. We're a family-owned company. around 1 billion in sales. Our purpose is we're wanting to touch essentially half the people in the world with our products and services. And in particular, our group, we're a division of Kemin. We're Kemin Nutriassurance. We were founded in 1989. We have over 400 employees, 900 customers globally, and over 400 different product formulations that we sell. And we are kind of view us as partnered with the pet food and rendering industry. So we're always looking for where the issues and how can we offer solutions to both of those industries. And as our portfolio goes, we sell a range of lipid oxidation products. We have a range of palatability enhancers, food safety products, and then health and nutrition products. And for today, the speakers and the work that you're seeing is going to come from our customer laboratory service team. And this team works with our customers and with our tech service managers. We kind of work in a partnership to find solutions. So we have a range of laboratories globally that are fully set up to run a range of lipid oxidation methods. And Kelly, since the inception of the laboratories, we've ran millions and millions of lipid oxidation tests. So for our laboratory locations, we have CLS laboratories globally. Katie, who's going to be talking second half of this, the research she did came from our Des Moines laboratory. But we have facilities in Europe, a couple in Asia, and then we have a sister company in South America we work closely on. And as far as with our Pet Food Alliance involvement, this is just kind of my summary over the years of the lipid oxidation working group, product quality group, whatever you want to call it. But this has just been what I kind of view as what our top priorities have been over the years. So we've talked a lot about identifying, okay, what are the best PV methods? What, as an industry, what do we harmonize and standardize on? And what are the best practices for, okay, it could be the PV method. Sampling has been an important topic as well. So if you don't get the right sample collected, it's going to be hard to have repeatable results between two laboratories. And then, as a future topic, okay, what are additional methods that we could supplement or could replace the PV method? And we're active in those additional alternative methods as well, but we're just going to restrict this today's topic just to the PV method only. So what are our challenges as an industry, as the Pet Food Alliance, as we try to work and move forward and better the methodologies? When you look at, okay, what are our challenges? Number one is, when you do the peroxide value methods, they're really only intended for fats and oils. The method itself, AOCS, it comes from the oilseed industry. That's what AOCS, their focus is. That's who their customer base is. So a lot of the methods that they have developed, that was a market and customer base that they were developed for. So as the pet food and rendering industry, we adopt a lot of these methods that were developed in other industries. We just have to keep in mind that our use case might not match what the original method's intended purpose was for. So with the AOCS or AOAC, they're very similar. There are a lot of methods out there globally. They're all basically the same method, but they were meant for fats and oils. Challenge number two we have is we're dealing with compounds that are not very stable. Hydroperoxides, which is what the peroxide value test measures, they're really unstable. So they can get destroyed very easily. They can get generated very easily. So any modifications or manipulation in the method and how you run the method can have huge impacts upon the result that you get. And, this is kind of what we view, the classic view of lipid oxidation. You have a fat, then you get peroxy radicals, then that'll form the hydroperoxide, which could be measured via PEV method. And then from there, you get into termination reactions, which most people are aware of by aldehydes, for example. Hexanal is the famous aldehyde that people typically measure. However, it is really, really more complicated than that. It's not as simple as this straight linear pathway through the oxidation process. There are a lot of different side reactions that can occur. And depending on if you have metals, the temperature, there's so many things that can impact that and cause the side reaction pathways actually be more important than the primary pathway for lipid oxidation. And then our third challenge is, there is no official method to extract fat from solid sample types. So that has always been a challenge because there's no method. Everyone has their special way or preferred way that they like to get the fat out of those solid samples. So that is a challenge because, again, when you run the AOCS method, it's meant for fats and oils. So you have to get that fat out. And there are so many variables that you can use for the fat extraction step. Some people like alcohol co-modifiers, some do not, some just straight up petroleum ether. Depending on where you're at in the world, heptane or hexane is very, very popular extraction solvents. So all of those are different variables that can impact the results that you get. And on a regular basis, I always hear this like, well, all right, well, there is an official method for extracting fat out. Well, why don't you just use that official extraction method and be done with it? And that is your extraction method. Well, the problem with the official method for extracting fat is it uses it requires drying samples down. So if you're coming from a sample that has a lot of moisture, you have to dry that down to 0% moisture. And then from there, then you put it in a oxalate system and essentially you boil it for 4 to 16 hours. And then from there, you have that extracted fat in a solvent mixture. And then from there, you're going to dry that down for, an additional 30 minutes at 100 degrees centigrade. So what do you have going on here? Everything that is bad for lipid oxidation. You have oxygen, you have heat, you have time, you have light exposure. And all of those are going to impact your final PV results. So while this is an official method, it's not the preferred method which we would want to use for extracting fat. And for the next part, we'll get into the actual work we've done fairly recently. This came from Katie and her team. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie and she can fill you in on some of the recent work we've done and what we want to do with this and how we want to move forward with it.
Sure. Go ahead to the next slide there, Ben. So before we get started, I want to share just a little bit of history before we dig into the data. Our NutriAssurance CLS labs run a handful of different peroxide value methods, but primarily we use AOCS and FOX2. So Ben talked about AOCS a little bit. FOX2 is an internal chemin method that was developed based off of published journal articles. Both of those methods are covered under our ISO 17025 scope of accreditation. So part of that, meeting that quality standard is proving that you're proficient in the analysis. And we do that by participating in proficiency test programs. Now, these are typically run by organizations like AOCS. They're going to take the same fat or oil sample and send it out to dozens of laboratories, collect the results, and tell you how close to the average result your data is. And what we saw is that both our AOCS and our FOX2 methods gave good passing results in these programs. They did not highlight any issues. But in our lab's internal comparison studies between the methods, we began to see those results, particularly on things that required extraction, rendered meals, occasionally pet food kibbles, those methods started to deviate a little more and more over time. And we really wanted to investigate why, because historically speaking, they had matched very nicely. So it indicated that something was changing with the performance of one or more of those methods. So we began a pretty extensive investigation into FOX2, which really revealed no major issues. We couldn't find any variable that was having a significant effect on the peroxide value it was generating. So after that investigation, we turned our attention to the AOCS method, and our prime suspect was really the fat extraction portion that's required for a solid sample, mostly because of all of the really good results that we had seen on the fat and oil proficiency tests. So to do so, we really needed a way to isolate the solvent effect as a variable. So we used a single lot of chicken fat, which we actually already have an extensive testing history in our lab. And the benefit of that is that we know the performance, we know that the way that we store that material in our lab, we can get consistent results over time, over a long period of time. And we already have an established expected range for the PV. That takes into account the day-to-day variation that we see in our lab with our devices, with our reagents. So that's a really nice way for us to know whether a result is normal for that fat or abnormal. So what we did was we took, keeping the amounts of fat and solvent consistent, we added each solvent variable to the fat and then evaporated it off. Again, keeping those evaporation conditions as consistent as possible between the variables until we were left with just the fat again and tested that fat. So really the only thing we're modifying here is the solvent choice. And what we found was a little surprising. So the results are presented in triplicate here. On the left, we have the chicken fat tested normally using the AOCS method. And then the subsequent bars are a variety of solvents and solvent blends. So you can see that when that same chicken fat is exposed to petroleum ether, sometimes called petroleum distillates, it significantly is affecting the peroxide value of the fat. Now, heptane, cyclohexane, the heptane and propanol blend all had a really minimal effect, but we also saw some effect with the heptane isopropanol blend. Certainly not to the extent that the straight PET ether did, but an effect nonetheless. Now, part of the reason that this was surprising to us is that PET ether is really widely used in the industry, including in our lab. So we wanted to take a closer look at that solvent in particular. So this slide shows what happens with a variety of brands and grades of petroleum ether. We wanted to know, is this isolated to a specific item number, or is this sort of across the board? So again, on the left is our chicken fat that has not been exposed to any solvent, just tested normally. And then at the bottom, these are the relative cost is designated with the dollar sign. So you can see that they're not all behaving the same, but they do all have an effect on the PV. So you really can't judge just by solvent or grade alone. When we go to the next slide, these are the same brand, the same grade of petroleum ether. So on the left is chicken fat, no extraction. And then in the middle, we have the ACS grade. It was a bottle that was older and had been opened for about a year. And then on the right, again, same brand, ACS grade, but it's a new, freshly ordered and freshly opened bottle. So you can see that even though it's the same brand and grade, there's a difference in the performance of that solvent. So same brand, same grade, but the effect on PV is not the same. Finally, we really wanted to know how the amount of petroleum ether used in the extraction could affect the PV. So using the same design, we exposed and then evaporated off different amounts of petroleum ether. And you can see that the PV increases incrementally as the fat is exposed to increasing amounts of petroleum ether. So really the amount of solvent that you're using to extract the fat from your meal or kibble can have, again, a significant impact on the end result of that PV. So we've talked a lot about fat extraction so far, and certainly those results are significant, and we wanted to make sure to share them right away with the Alliance, but it's not the only source of variation in the method. And in fact, if we go back to the method scope that Ben showed at the beginning of this presentation, there's a statement in there that says this method is highly empirical and any variation in the test procedure may result in erratic results. So what are those things that you really need to watch out for? Starting with sample size, and I really think as that this list is not all encompassing, but as testing laboratories, minimizing variability wherever we can will help us as an industry speak the same language when we're talking about PVs. So this is the next slide is a table that's published in AOCS Inform, I think like 20 years ago. But our internal studies at Chemin have shown very similar results. So testing with less than the recommended 5 grams of fat or oil can cause, again, a significant deviation in results. So if we were to look at a fat that had a peroxide value of 9 when tested with 5 grams, and that same fat was tested with only 1 gram of sample, the method gave a 14. So pretty significant difference when we're talking about fats and oils. Additionally, it's important to consider the reaction time. So this next slide is some work that we did, I'd say about 5 years ago, where we let the potassium iodide react for extended periods of time. The published method is a 1-minute reaction time, but when you let that reaction time continue, you see ever increasing amounts of peroxides in your data. So keeping that as a consistent variable in a PV method will also prove to be very important in terms of controlling variability between methods and within a method. And then there are other things to consider. So one of the things that we really noticed when we were evaluating these different solvents and solvent blends is that some are much easier to evaporate off than others. So a watch out for people is making sure that you have fully evaporated the solvent out of your material. When you're using a controlled amount of fat and doing an experiment like this, that's an easy thing to do because you know how much fat you added, so you know what weight you need to get back down to. But some of the solvents are easier to work with than others. So making sure that you have a way to test whether you have fully evaporated all of the solvent and you can validate, the conditions of your evaporation procedure is really important, because otherwise you'll end up with solvent remaining in that fat, and essentially you'll be diluting your fat with solvent, unintentionally giving a lower peroxide value. Monitoring the performance of your devices, and this is really just good lab practice, but making sure that your pipettes, your dispensers, your burettes, your probes, if you're using an auto titrator, making sure that all of those devices are performing correctly and consistently is going to be really important in terms of getting repeatable results. And we've talked a lot about the quality control of chemicals in terms of the extraction procedure, but that also applies to the chemicals that are in the AOCS method or other PV methods themselves. So we have seen historically in our lab some sporadic issues with suppliers or lots of chemicals and reagents that give noticeably different results for PV. So knowing the performance of the supplies that you buy is really important. It's certainly not to the same extent that we see here with the extraction solvent, but it's definitely something to consider and monitor in your testing lab. And then finally, how you're handling the samples themselves. How are they sampled? How are they packaged? How are they stored? How long is the time between the fat extraction, weighing the sample out, and the analysis of the sample? Those all have an effect on your end results. So keeping that consistent will help us all come to the same answer when determining peroxide value. So for conclusions, we want to make sure that we're controlling variables during all steps of PV measurement. It's really imperative when we're talking about harmonizing that we don't focus in on just one thing, that it's a holistic approach to peroxide value measurement. That being said, the solvent extraction has the potential to seriously impact your measured peroxide value.
Thank you, Katie. And one more thing to state on this, petroleum ether, which we've talked a lot about. In our working group, we've talked a lot over the years on, well, okay, if we standardize on one solvent, petroleum ether has been a popular solvent that we've talked about standardizing on. It's probably within commercial and everyone's own labs is the most popular extraction solvent that's probably utilized right now. Largely because it's got a low boiling point, so it's easy to separate and remove from the fat. It's cheap, affordable, but from this research, we're finding that not only is it just standardizing on the solvent, but we're also going to have to take into account other measurements. What type of solvent, how much solvent, the grade of solvent, and it turned into a bigger task than maybe we were anticipating initially, but a lot of variables to understand and to explore in the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you both, Ben and Katie, for that presentation that not only highlights some of the opportunities that exist for continued collaboration, but the work that you all have done in this very important topic. And I think it spaces, to your point, Katie, about the comprehensive approach that's necessary as we think about something that is as detailed as peroxide value evaluation. With that, we have some time now for Q&A from those who are in attendance. So please feel free to use the chat feature to provide a question for our webinar presenters, and then I'll have a series of questions as well, particularly for those who are joining to watch the recording of this webinar. You mentioned this early, and feel free, Ben and or Katie, to answer this, but what do you see as next steps in this project and opportunities for folks who are curious or interested in those next steps, how to best engage with you all to see what that looks like?
Yeah, and actually on the next slide, there's a caveat we want to mention, which is that solvent comparisons were preliminary, and they were done with oftentimes with a single supplier and lot. So like we saw with the PET ether, we anticipate that age, open date, lot to lot variation, all of those could affect results, and that there are multiple factors to consider when choosing the best solvent. Ben mentioned it already, but PET ether is very easy to evaporate out of fat. It's probably why it's been so popular in the industry. So ease of use, taking into account safety profiles for lab techs that are going to be working with these solvents. There are a lot of things to consider when we, as an industry, choose a best solvent for fat extraction. But Chemin is continuing to work on this. We're right now evaluating additional sample types and looking at additional variables, but we are hoping to further collaborate with a partner or partners from academia or industry that want to help us continue to move this work forward. I think verifying these things in other labs, and maybe dividing up some of the multiple variables that we're going to want to look at, would be really helpful to have some industry partners. So we'd love to work with the Alliance on that.
Yeah, there are other, members of the Pet Food Alliance who have a lot of internal capabilities on their end. So what we're finding and, being able to accelerate that, okay, confirmation work, yes, but then also like, okay, well, we found this, it just opens up a lot of other questions when you start doing some of this work. So being able to explore some of those other questions in a quick manner would be useful. So I suppose I'm going to put one last slide up. We should probably thank the two people who had to do a tremendous amount of work for what was presented today. So thanks, Lindsay and Dwa.
Yes, and thank you again, Ben, as well as Katie, for presenting this information. And just speaking to that last point about the opportunities for collaboration, again, leaning into the mission of the Pet Food Alliance is to find opportunities for collaborative research in areas that benefit the entire sectors represented through the Pet Food Alliance, such as the pet food manufacturers, as well as those from a rendering perspective. And so particularly for those who are joining us now or who are watching the recording, please do continue to engage in this conversation, either through attendance at the working group meetings, participation in the working group semi-monthly calls, or our annual meeting to be held next spring in conjunction with Pet Food Forum. One of the priorities of the Pet Food Alliance is to go beyond having conversations about what research should happen, but moving towards funding that research. And so this is certainly an exciting opportunity for the Pet Food Alliance to consider funding additional collaborative research and really impacting topic areas. Are there any questions from those who are joining us live today that you might have for our presenters? I think maybe one question that comes up commonly and through my lens from a research perspective is, you mentioned, Ben, earlier on how some of these methodologies, we try to use methods for matrices that they weren't necessarily intended for. How do you feel, like, from a robustness perspective, do you think there's hope in finding a methodology that works across the different matrices that are in the pet food and rendering industries, or will it be that we really need to fine tune and tweak methodologies given the variety of matrices that exist? So maybe more of a philosophical question versus a database question.
Yeah, well, one thing which I definitely learned from Dr. Edwin Frankel, who's kind of, the godfather of lipid oxidation. And he always used to say there is no perfect method that works in all applications and matrices. Now, with that said, I think we're making a lot of progress, and I think there are some methods out there that are holding a lot of promise as we move forward. We are evaluating some other methods for peroxide value measurements. For example, we're looking at some of the side reaction chemistry on what goes on in the lipid oxidation pathway. And I'm really a strong supporter of, methods like the FOX2, for example, which you don't have that fat extraction step. So you eliminate some of those variables that can influence and impact the results. Is it perfect method in all matrices? No, but it does have a lot of hope and promise. And, CDR Food Lab has a very similar method. It's all based on the same chemistry. I know they've been a big active supporter in involvement in this industry. So having partnerships like that with third-party companies who can help on some of the methodology, I think, is of value. So, but I think there's hope. I've had to deal with peroxide values for 30 years on my end, and I think over the last 10 or 20, I've been saying, okay, I want to have the the method that replaces the PV method, whatever that may be. Maybe it's a better PV method, but I do hold hope that we're going to have some better methodologies, and we're making progress on this, right? So we are figuring out right now what variables impact the AOCS PV method, and I think as we adopt and use some of that knowledge, I think we can definitely improve the methods and what we have in place now.
Thank you for that. And I love that you mentioned Dr. Frankel, because I've read that some of those early papers. They're some of my favorites. So I appreciate the reference there. Any questions? And feel free, I know as well, some folks may need time to think about this or reflect on this. So earlier in the presentation, Ben shared the contact information for he and Katie. So if questions arise after the presentation, do feel free to reach out directly, and continue certainly to engage in the Pet Food Alliance working groups and meetings where we have I think really rich discussions that lead to research like this, and then continuing this idea of forward progress in ways that we can make the methodology more consistent with its intended outcomes for how it's used within these industries. But if there are no additional questions for our webinar provider today, I just want to offer again our thanks from the Pet Food Alliance for sharing, and for not only sharing today, but being such an incredible partner throughout this, not only the product's quality, but the product safety, and for the Alliance in general, and moving the needle forward as it relates to impactful research that happens in these topic areas. So we're incredibly appreciative, certainly for your time, but also for your energies in other spaces related to the Pet Food Alliance. The recording of this webinar will be posted on the Pet Food Alliance YouTube page. And if you registered for this webinar or attending live today, you'll receive a link to the recording when we send out the information about our upcoming December webinar. So we hope you're able to join us in December. And if you're watching the recording of this, we look forward to seeing you as well in the future at Pet Food Alliance meetings. But thank you for your time today and for your engagement with our webinar speakers, and we'll see you at our next Pet Food Alliance event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.